What do Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and Hitler have in common? They were all obsessively studied by Jim Jones, the cult leader who convinced and coerced some 900 members of his People's Temple to drink poison Flavor Aid in 1978.
Steve, it's a cult. You're being brainwashed. I knew I wasn't brainwashed because I'm smart. I'm educated. I'm from a good family. I didn't feel brainwashed.
It's hard to know what I would have done with my life if I had spent my 30s building a legitimate company and not working for a narcissistic con man, a sociopath, sex addict who was pretending to help people with their goals. Other people might look at my experience and say, I would never fall for that. I would never fall for NXIVM, and that's so obvious. But anyone can fall for something.
Hello, and welcome back to the Babblings podcast. I'm so excited to get into the podcast episode today. It has been literally maybe 2 months since I've recorded. And I know you bitches are tired of hearing me say that I took a break. I don't know why. And maybe I should just commit to the bit and have podcasts be every other month, because it seems to be like this pattern that I keep doing. But I want it to be monthly. It just like things keep coming up. And, you know, I live in the real world with a real life, and I get sick. Like, that's also the thing too. I feel like, I don't know. And I do believe that everything's in divine timing too. So maybe I need to think about it as like, I just wasn't meant to record at that time, but I do want to be recording monthly. So I am working on that. Anyways, this is the Babblings podcast. If you're new here, welcome. The Babblings podcast is the offshoot and audio section of my multimedia blog, Babblings. You can get everything Babblings at babblings.net if you're not already there. Babblings.net is also really cool because there's games, can't be talking to people. There's games, there's nostalgic MTV-esque music video players and nostalgic TV players. It's the blog, so personal essays, blog posts, the Babblings newsletter, which is called the Babblings Report, which comes out on the first Friday of every month. I have been so good at that. I've been loving doing the Babblings Report. I feel like I've gotten like the last two have been formatted so fun, which was a big reason of why I wanted to have my own website and not be on Substack anymore, because I wanted, the freedom to customize it and to make it more interactive and fun. And I've been really happy with the additions that have been coming out and that will continue. Next to me is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer, which is the May Reading Club Book of the Month. We are currently doing Nonfiction Nature Spring. So the Babblings newsletter, which again comes out on the first Friday of every month, holds, it has movie club. And currently this year, I think I'm going to do it for the rest of this year, I'm doing movie picks in pairings and choosing two movies based on the astrological themes of the month, the overlapping archetypes. So for May right now, we're looking at Taurus and Gemini. And the themes that I decided to go with were beauty and brains. And so the movies that I chose were Legally Blonde and Miss Navajo. Legally Blonde, I've watched 7 million times, though I did watch it the other week with my sister for the first time. So that was fun. That was, if you want to know my personality and like who I am and what shaped me to be, my favorite movies as a child, like I'm talking like younger than 10, Phantom of the Opera, Legally Blonde, Sound of Music, Dancing in the Rain, Sailor Moon. I think there's one more, but like those things like shaped me. And so I was really excited to do Legally Blonde, of course, because May is also my birth month. And my mom's a Gemini and at one point a vegetarian. So, Elle is a Gemini vegetarian. My mom's birthday is in May too. So I just thought that was fun. I watched Miss Navajo last night. It's a really interesting documentary. It's short, it's sweet, it's to the point, and also feels very like throwback if you're in the mood for something that feels, because it was made in the early and published in the early 2000s. But it's just a really intimate look at the Miss Navajo Nation pageant, which is, and I talk more about this in the newsletter. So of course, all of my thoughts, all of my reasoning, deeper dive and more understanding, check out the Babblings Report. It's just a really intimate look at this beauty pageant, that's so much more about beauty, so much more So about so much more than beauty, and it's also about their heritage and continuing on their traditions and their indigenous culture. It's about having skills and what, the whole of a woman spiritually, and also what she brings. And these girls butcher whole sheeps and then cook them. It's really fantastic and cool. But yeah, so all my thoughts are there. Nonfiction, we also are doing a reading club, which what we're reading and my thoughts on that comes out in the Babblings Report every month. I'm breaking the reading club up into four quarters of the year. We're not following like business quarters either. We're following it seasonally. So the spring quarter is April, May, and June. Summer quarter will be July, August, and September. Fall's October, November, December. And then we'll start all over again. As long as this goes well, and people seem to be enjoying it so far and to be picking up some books, so that's fun. Or at least adding to their TBR. I really wanted it to be a way. I see a lot of personal curriculums floating around the internet because it's like popular right now. And I just wanted to do something that's a little bit different. I also think a lot of the personal curriculums going around are not what I would call entry level. They're asking a lot of you. They're asking you to read multiple things, watch multiple things, etc. And so that's kind of what I wanted to just pare it down. And then also I feel like a lot of, oh my gosh, that bird's so loud. Did you guys hear that? Hello. I love getting a little confirmation from the universe that I'm on the right track. But I also just felt like a lot of them too kind of maybe followed very repetitive themes and focused heavily on the classics and what I would kind of consider to be like elitist and what's the word? I was just thinking this about somebody the other day. They're so pretentious. And I think a lot of it is a little pretentious. And so I just wanted it to be a little bit more accessible, a little bit more entry level and diverse, because the classics are not the only way, to read and to learn and to grow, or through these like pretentious media forms. And we're with movie picks, we're deep in the Criterion collection, but we're also watching Legally Blonde. I'm trying to throw a mix of genres at you and things that are, more common and things that are a little bit more niche with the book club. Right now we're doing nonfiction nature spring. So all of the books in the spring quarter are science nonfiction books based around nature and the earth. Like I said, we're reading Braiding Sweetgrass right now. Last month we read Strata, Stories from Deep Time, which is a really interesting book about the formation of the planet and how we came to be. Thoughts on that are also in the May Babblings Report for last month's book. My thoughts on Braiding Sweetgrass will be in June's. And I'm really loving this so far. And, I want it to be diverse as far as authors, people that are writing them to be diverse, for the genres to be diverse, and then for the topics to be diverse, because I'm all about, being intentional. And I think I say all the time, use the library. You don't have to buy all of these books that people like shove down your throats, even the classics. And I thought this would be a good way, not only for you guys, but for me as well, because we're reading books that I've never read and books that I've wanted to read these books, to help us build intentional and diverse libraries. Not that it's a bad thing to have a library full of smut books, but I do think, and this kind of goes back to the literacy podcast. If you listen to that, if you haven't listened to that, take a look at that. But, I just think that if you want to be a reader, also everybody doesn't need to be a reader. Literacy does not denote intelligence at all. You definitely can learn more and grow more. And I talked a lot about that in the literacy episode, but it's complex. I just think it's important to diversify what you're reading. And I think getting stuck in a singular genre or a singular trope, or with only white authors, I think that is just the same as someone who refuses to read books at all, because you're not broadening your horizons. You're just staying within the comfort of what you want, and that's not challenging you. So if you're wanting to grow, if you're wanting to learn more, you have to challenge yourself. And so I wanted this to be entry level. It's one book, it's accessible material. I'm not giving you like a quiz or, anything. I am giving you like what I'm curious about, what I'm looking to learn from each book. Intentional, right? Strata was to get us to learn about the earth and how it came to be and how we came to be and how we are part of the earth and the earth is part of us, and how the reciprocity came to be. Braiding Sweetgrass, we're really getting into how we interact with the world and with nature, what that reciprocity looks like, and how humans, through colonization have cut ourselves off from this indigenous wisdom and knowledge, and how we can learn more to get back into our true purpose here on the earth. And then the next month's book, June, is the Mother Tree book. I think it's by Susan Hubbard. It's not right in front of me, but it's in, the newsletters and stuff. And I feel like I'm interested about that because I just read a chapter in Braiding Sweetgrass where she talked a lot about trees. And so that's going to be looking just more at I just think trees are I love trees. I think trees are so important and such a reflection of ourselves. And so we're diving deeper, even more into that idea of a reciprocal relationship when it comes specifically to trees and what can trees, specifically teach us. So anyways, that's Nature Nonfiction Spring. If you're interested, check out the Babblings report every month. I also just give life updates, music for the month. There's an energy read if you are missing the energy tarot card reads that used to be in the Babblings podcast. That home is now in the Babblings report. It's been giving me a lot of insight, so I hope it's been giving you a lot of insight. I'm getting hot. The air is off. I'm sorry if you can hear the fan. You can probably hear outside. The air is broken, but we persist and we keep moving, and it's not that bad. Though it is starting to get hot in Ohio. It's 85 degrees today, which is hot. Anyways, so yeah, that's the Babblings report. And then mini seasonal articles. In the May report, I did a little mini section on dandelion magic and how I pick dandelions, and then what I use dandelions for, in my spiritual practices, witchiness, if that's something that you're interested in. So check her out. Yeah. So anyways, let's get into this episode. Current events. One, I don't have a lot of time, but two, I am also working on a big live from the end times for this. I try to do that quarterly. So there's a big live from the end times coming, talking all about the Voter Rights Act, fallout from that, the protests and things, the disruptions we've seen in places like Tennessee, checking on Minneapolis and Minnesota, some global things that are going on. So I figure just keep on the lookout for that. That'll probably come. This is going to come out on the 22nd, probably. And then the next 2 to 3 weeks, I'm a little bit off schedule, but I just wanted to kind of how I did the Current Events Corner episode, if anybody remembers from the fall, where I dedicated a whole podcast episode just to what is going on. I might do that again because I've been outlining the live from the end times, but that outline could also very easily be turned into a podcast outline. So that's coming, but I just feel like there's so much going on. There's so many important things going on. My biggest thing is, of course, to inform you, but I kind of also assume that if you're listening to this, you have a sense of what's going on. You're already kind of tapped in. And so it's also to document and to have further discussion. So I will leave some articles in the description of this episode. You can check out if you're watching this on YouTube or a podcast platform that's not babblings.net. Go to the link in the description to go to this episode's page on the website, and I will link some videos and some articles just about current events going on. But I kind of just want to, when I have 2 hours to just sit down and either talk it all out to you or have a minute to just sit down and turn the outline into written word and put that all out to you. Either way, if you have a preference on how you get that information, let me know. But I've been pondering the idea. So actually, I'm glad I brought this up. I've been pondering the idea of doing a live from the end times in video podcast format like I did in the fall. Because sometimes it's just a lot easier to yap about things, especially when there's so much to talk about. And of course, I always will still link references. So if you have any opinions about that, let me know. I'll put a poll on this episode's webpage. So again, go to babblings.net for references, resources, especially for the topic we're talking about today, and for the poll to let me know how you would like to get current events corner / this quarter's live from the end times, global events, domestic events. Today's topic, a topic that I have been passionate about for years now, and a topic that really, once I started wrapping my brain around it, it completely changed my worldview and was the beginning of what I now see looking back 7-8 years later, was a catalyst for me to, I guess, deconstruct, societal norms, but also societal expectations more specifically, and led me down the road on the path that I am today. And, now going back to school to get a bachelor's in humanities that is going to eventually go towards getting my master's and PhD in anthropology. And you know what it did? So the topic today is cults. Let's just start there. We're talking about cults. We're talking about mind control. We're talking about indoctrination. We're talking about undue influence. And how it happens, how we can recognize it, and how we can try to navigate in a world where people constantly want to manipulate us. So it's bigger than just, this is what a cult is, and yada, 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 yada. It's how, when we understand what a cult is, how a cult operates, when we can understand that it is not happenstance, right? People are manipulative and manipulative intentionally. When we can start to peel back that layer, we can start to understand ourselves. We can start to understand the world around us more. And we can start to understand how to follow our gut instinct. So I obviously I love documentaries, but then I would say 2018, 2019, I got really into cult documentaries, and there was a lot coming out. But then, and I think that's what sparked my interest. That's when a lot of the NXIVM stuff was going on. People were talking about the FLDS then. It's when I started to get into Mormons, and a lot of people coming out of Mormonism and deconstructing Mormonism. And there's a lot of people on YouTube and on socials that is their content, as being ex-Mormon, which I believe which in my opinion, and everything that I say in this episode podcast is, I can't say it's just my opinion because I did a lot of research and I'm going to be quoting a lot of research, but let's just say that this is for entertainment purposes only. So do your own research, take what you want with a grain of salt, and I am not purposefully trying to defame or harm any one institution or religion or community's public image. Scientology, you got that? Is that good? Okay. So, and I say that too because a lot of Scientology documentaries are coming out at the time. I think that's when around the time Leah Remini's show was on. And so I was watching a lot of that. And then I would go on deeper dives and find, I want to consume all the cult documentaries that there are, because the psychology of it all just started to really fascinate me. And when I watched one documentary on NXIVM, which NXIVM was run by Keith Raniere. He was the, quote, vanguard, the leader of the group, and they were a self-help group. They were a self-help workshops and materials and curriculum. You come to them, you go through their program, you learn how to operate and see the world in a better place. But deeper than that, it was a high control group, controlling and dominating these people's lives and having full authority over how they lived it. And then even deeper than that, it was basically a sex cult. And Keith Raniere was trafficking women and branding women and creating these sex slaves. So that's how deep that goes. So I was watching these documentaries about NXIVM, and yeah, this was, I think, about the time when they were going to trial. and all of this. So like all the documentaries and stuff were coming out. And India Oxenberg, her mom, Catherine Oxenberg, is an actress, and they kind of helped bring, there was actually a lot of high profile kind of like C-list celebrities that were involved with this that I think helped bring the story, that makes the story bigger and made it louder for us to like see it and then to talk about it. But anyways, Catherine Oxenberg used her resources to the best of her ability to constantly try and get her daughter India out of this group. She joined the group, was in it for several years, eventually being branded and being one of Keith Raniere's sex slaves. And in one of the documentaries, it's maybe a follow-up documentary or maybe just a follow-up video, I can't remember for sure, but I remember India having a conversation with her therapist and telling her therapist, you know, it's hard for me to understand because I, in the moment, believed that I was consenting to having these sexual relationships with Keith Raniere. In the moment, in my head, I said, yes, I want to do this, but it felt bad. And every time after, I would be sick to my stomach. And I think she even maybe threw up sometimes. But she always felt awful afterwards. But she was saying yes, but her body was saying no. And the therapist said, you know, that's your gut reaction. That's your gut instinct, knowing deep inside you that the position that you're in and what's being asked of you and what you're doing is not safe, is not positive, and is harming you, and is not what you want to do. And something about her saying that, something about that clicked so many pieces in my brain together, thinking about this idea of a gut reaction or a gut instinct. And I think it's truly important, you know, to always remember that humans are animals, right? And deep under this different level of consciousness that we have, which, you know, we assume to be more elevated than the consciousness of plants or the consciousness of animals. Though, how could you compare and say that when one is better than the other when we truly don't even understand the others? And anyways, what's to say that their level of consciousness is not more sophisticated, which I believe that it is. But underneath, you know, and what's different is the way that our brain has developed, right? That's a big part of it. So it's interesting to think that underneath all of this analytical and thinking that we have, this level of consciousness that we have, is still an animal instinct and is still a gut reaction. And it made me realize that we know when things are good or bad always, right? In that moment, I understood that conditioning since the time we are born and those before us were born, and this continued and repeated cycle, which has compounded and it's only taken us farther and farther away from our natural instincts. We've been taught, right, to ignore that gut instinct, and that's what mind control is. And also to think, and I think it also just made me realize how fallible, is it fallible or fallible? I think it's fallible. How fallible the human brain is, how easily manipulated the brain is. And because we are conditioned just in normal society to ignore our gut instinct, and then you take that in a high control group, in a cult, that gets taken to the nth degree, where all of these things happen to force you in a way to ignore your gut instinct and to go along with what is being said, right? I think also, too, it just made me realize how dangerous the brain is. And then it led me on more of a path of understanding psychology. We are taught to see the brain as this great evolutionary biological component, this the end-all be-all of consciousness and the smartest thing, and that it always knows, and it's what makes us a better species, that's what people want to say, or if it's what makes us, or people use the brain all the time, like right during slavery, to say like, oh, their brains are developed differently or whatever, which makes us more superior, right? To uphold white supremacy. And the brain is so easily tricked. The brain truly operates to keep us safe, but without true understanding of what safety is, just what it thinks safety is, or it uses that to, or this sort of like rationale that we have as humans to always try to rationalize things, and how that can be so detrimental to us and our understanding of the world, and also can really changes the decisions we make, and then therefore the lives that we live, because maybe we're choosing or doing the rational thing. I just remember, because, there's moments in time when you can just remember something clicking. And that conversation really clicked for me, this idea that gut instinct is there. And we are so taught to live in the head and to believe the head, and for that to be the superior organism. And yet there is something intrinsic within us. There's our animalistic, as the animals that we are born with a compass. We are born with a true sensation of what is safe and what is not. I mean, you could even think about this. Say you're talking to someone, like a new, like, boo. You're talking, whatever, and your head is telling you they say all the right things. You like them. They like you. There's all these things you like about them. There's all these reasons why you work. There's all these reasons why it should feel good. Here's why we're compatible. All the reasons why other people will think we are compatible and think our relationship is good. And yet every time you're with them, you have constant butterflies. And sometimes there is a level of good nervousness, there is that level. But eventually, you have to listen to that gut instinct and say, why am I so anxious talking to this person all the time? Why do I get so nervous talking to this person? Why does my gut have these butterflies in them all the time? And it's because you don't feel safe with that person. And a lot of the times, instead of listening to what our body is telling us, we listen to the mind. And ultimately, what this discussion, or what my ideas come down to, are how colonization and white supremacy and the way that the world has developed over the last hundreds of centuries has all been purposeful, and in an attempt, and in a successful attempt, to remove us from our animal side of passion and creativity and feeling, and in our body and in our gut instinct of what is good and what is not good, and pushed us to live in a cerebral realm, because that is the realm that can be most easily manipulated. And to take us away from those senses takes us away from true knowing. It takes us away from knowing what's good for us and what's not. And takes us away from knowing what's safe and what's not. And then we're only living on, what we've been conditioned to see as safety, to see as stability, to see as abundance, to see as purpose, because it feeds what the powers that be want. It feeds the cycle of capitalism. It feeds the cycle of white supremacy, feeds the cycle of patriarchy, and keeps us reliant on being told instead of relying on our own personal knowing. So that's what we're going to talk about. That's why we need to understand cults. And because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you see and spot the patterns, you can't unsee it in every dynamic. You can't unsee it in a workout class or a Pilates studio. You can't unsee it in your mom group, in your friendships, in your relationships. You can't unsee it in the workplace, and you can't unsee it in the greater, wider scope of the world and civilization and society that we live in today, is completely built on all of this undue influence and indoctrination. And so, in short, my thesis statement for this episode is I want to focus on how we can understand cults and cult psychology and methods of undue influence in order to help us better understand societal conditioning and indoctrination as a whole. So let's talk about cults. We know about Jim Jones, Don't Drink the Kool-Aid, the Mason family, Heaven's Gate, FLDS. Mother God is recent, Teal Swan is recent, Twin Flame University, that's a fun YouTube cult. NXIVM, we've talked about Scientology, Mormonism, evangelical Christianity, Baptists. I mean, what are those people that go door to door? Jehovah's Witness. All of these are people or groups or religions that have been founded to be cults or have been accused of being a cult. Keyword Scientology, keyword accused. Okay? I know y'all don't play, and I don't really feel like getting stalked because they'll go after anybody. Like, even a nobody like me, they'll go after anybody. Anyways. And cults, like this list that I just said, they can all look different. It could be one person like Teal Swan spouting her rhetoric from the pulpit that is YouTube and creating a mass following and actually telling some people to off themselves. Or there's FLDS, which is a subsect offshoot of mainstream Mormonism that split when the church decided to change a bunch of things and try to be a little bit more modern. And the FLDS was like, no, we're not going to be modern, and we still fuck with polygamy. Okay, so that's a bit religious. We could talk about the Manson family. They were a small group living in a commune in California run by Charles Manson, and they were pew, 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 killing people. To what end? I don't really remember off the top of my head. But that was a lot. You have NXIVM, which I previously talked about, which started out as a self-help group. Mother God very recently was this like really small cult, again, using YouTube and the internet, which has been fascinating, in the last 20 years, how a lot of these groups are now primarily connected and pushing their messaging through the internet and how people are able to use that for nefarious means. But it was based around, this one person. She called herself Mother God. She ended up dying. They carried her body across state lines, got in trouble. Anyways, there's a documentary about it. So, check that out. And the word cult or cultish or cult-like gets thrown around a lot, much like Don't Drink the Kool-Aid does from what happened to the people of Jonestown when Jim Jones, poisoned all of them. And it's said in jest a lot of the time, though it's not, it's not funny because, I feel like tons of people died, tons of children died, far away from their family and true friends and true support system. And the story goes that people willingly drink the Kool-Aid when we know now that is not true. Many people were forced to and were purposefully killed against their will. So, we say these kinds of things and I think it normalizes them. And it's still, I was just watching Real Housewives of Beverly Hills and something came up about a cult and the reaction to it was wild. And it still kind of gets me that cults are still so almost taboo or silly or laughable, right? Because people try to separate themselves from these horrific things, and it's laughable that anybody would do that, though we'll get into how people get into cults. And the person that says that they are not susceptible to cults is probably the person most likely to join a cult. But it's kind of just still talked about flippantly when a lot of these things, we're talking about horrendous, violent crimes, typically in sexual nature also happening to hundreds of victims. And not only that kind of abuse, but also the mental and psychological torture, the cognitive dissonance that people have to live in, and the way that, these cults and being under this sort of mind control completely changes the fabric of who you are and how you go forward. So it not only is causing chaos and causing harm in the present, but people's futures are forever changed when that's something that they've been a part of. Let alone many people, many children are born into these groups and raised in these groups, especially the religious ones. So, I understand like, oh, that's like a cult, but I think if we truly understand what it is, we're less likely to talk about it so flippantly. Cult is derived from the Latin word cult, which meant like worship or devotion. It's also why, like there's words like occultism for kind of like the secret. It was, much more about like kind of like religious or a group or a following like devoted or worshiping one single thing, which I think is still prevalent because in all of these groups, they all are devoted or worshiping often a singular figure or like religious mythology. But typically there's like a singular figure, that's running the show. The APA Dictionary of Psychology defines cult as a religious or quasi-religious group characterized by unusual or atypical beliefs, seclusion from the outside world, and an authoritarian structure. Cults tend to be highly cohesive, well-organized, secretive, and hostile to non-members. In their book, The Guru Papers, Masks of Authoritarian Power, scholar Diana Alstead and philosopher Joel Kramer refers to cults as groups with an authoritarian structure where the leader's power is not constrained by scripture, tradition, or any other higher authority. Should the guru become paranoid, greedy, or merely bored, as many do, they can get their disciples to do most anything. I think that is an interesting definition to include because it's talking about how the power is not constrained to scripture, tradition, or any other higher authority. And in most cases, especially if they are religious groups, right, the authority figure has the power to override something that would be in the Bible or something that would be in a religious text or a mythology that has been passed down for generations. The authority figure is not also beholden to that, where how he acts is not beholden to what said scripture that they may be, forming the whole religion or group around. He is not constrained by that. Different than like how, like maybe in a normal church, right? The priest is also held to the standards of the Bible or the religious text. Cult scholar Stephen Hawson describes cults as any group that uses unethical mind control to pursue its ends, whether religious, political, or commercial. I think that those are three interesting sections or subsects, or religious, political, or commercial, because I think that also includes politics, and commercial covers things like workout classes, self-help groups, etc. And then psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton laid out what he calls the 8 deadly sins as defining criteria for a cult. The first one being milieu control. I think I said that right. But that basically just means that the cult or the group has full control over like the communication, any media that a person consumes, how they communicate, what's being told to them as far as like news-wise, what scriptures they're reading, etc. Mystical manipulation, where the leader attempts to present themselves as magical or in some way. This happens a lot. Like Keith Raniere in NXIVM said he had this like crazy IQ and he solved all these problems and he was this just like crazy super smart guy, and it was all bullshit, but that's what he used to try to other himself and make himself more powerful than he actually was. Same things kind of go with like Teal Swan or Mother God, making them seem like they're like these mystical, magical people tapped into a consciousness that we're not able to tap into, and so we must go through them in order to receive these revelations. Number 3 on Lifton's list is the demand for purity. We see this oftentimes in controlling people's sex. And I say this a lot, but this is where, the idea comes from, is thinking about cult psychology. Oftentimes, there's a lot of control over sex and sexual relationships, who's in relationship with who's having sex with who, whether you're allowed to have sex or not, whether you're allowed to talk about sex, whether you're allowed to express your sexuality, or also whether you're allowed to be anything other than heterosexual. Repression of like homosexuality or any other type of sexual relationship is unclean, not pure. And then of course you're punished when you don't do what you're supposed to do, or you maybe show ankle like in the FLDS or whatever. And when you can control people's sex, that again, in their passion. And I'm actually working on a vlog about this, about how to alchemize your sexual energy into creative and passionate energy, and how when I've been abstinent from sex, I've been the most creative I've ever been, because I realized how to transmute that energy and what's really behind that, and the creativity and the passion of it all. Again, that is part of our animalistic instincts. Creativity is human nature. Passion is human nature. Sex and pleasure is human nature. And when you can control that, when you can stifle people's desires, when you stifle the way people express themselves, they become a lot more easy to control, because you're controlling one of the most fundamental, unique human parts of them. And again, that goes into the gut. I also want to talk about the solar plexus and the sacral chakra, thinking about those parts of our body, like our belly and our gut and where our sex organs are. We hold safety and passion and creativity and power there. And when we're not expressing ourselves, and when we're not experiencing pleasure, and we're not trusting to listen to the feelings that we have in our gut, we're a lot easier to control, because then we're up here, and this is so easy to control. The fifth is sacred science. So there's usually some sort of doctrine, a path to follow. Scientology has its levels, similarly to Nixium had its levels you worked up through. And then you got, there's also usually, because another part of this is language, which I'm going to talk about next, but there's a different path, and then you move up levels and higher rank. And with more rank becomes more power. Typically also following the doctrine helps you move up in rank, and then the higher you move up in rank, usually the closer to the truth of what's really going on in the organization or the community you get, because you slowly get more and more indoctrinated. And often slowly more desensitized. Sometimes they will use this science to desensitize you and to get you used to, bad things being potentially supposedly good. 6 on Lifton's list is loading the language. Cult communities have words, phrases, and stories that are only understood by their members. While this pattern of specialized language is true of many specialty groups, the purpose of the loaded language in cults is particularly to serve as thought terminating. In other words, the language repeated as mantras within a cult is used to shut down critical thinking, questions, and doubts. It also builds a psychological wall between group members and outsiders, because the use of language seems odd to people not in the cult, leading to distancing and increased isolation. The language part of this is so big. Cultish by The Language of Cults by Amanda Montel. I read this a couple years ago. It's a really good book if you want to pick it up. But so much of mind control is an understanding of linguistics and how language can be used to manipulate. And so that little clip that I just said, was from Lifton's Ideas. And what it's saying is, it's a couple things. When you're using a certain language that only certain people know, it makes you kind of feel like you're on the in crowd. And then again, helps with that part of the distancing and isolation that cults love. Cults love to isolate you and distance you from the people that are important to you that are not in the group, because the more connected you are to the outside, the less easy it is to have control over you, because you still have these people not reinforcing the narrative of the cult leader and the cult members. So it gives you this window into, maybe what I'm doing isn't right. Maybe what I'm doing isn't, what I'm supposed to be doing, or maybe everyone doesn't agree with this, or maybe I am thinking in a way that I shouldn't, right? When you still have that connection to the outside. So it helps with the isolation and the distancing. But then also, when you think about language, we think in our own languages, we speak in our own languages, and then typically people dream in their native language. And so when you can get people to constantly be thinking or referencing or dreaming in this sort of jargon or spiritual language, then you can control how people think. And the thought terminating cliche is what I believe it's called, which is kind of what was referenced here, what this language is used for. So that when you have a thought like, let's think about like a company. You're in a company and you're like, I don't understand why we have to work so hard, or we have to be paid less, or why are we doing this a certain way, right? You start to question maybe why something happens. And your companies love to have jargon, in company culture. And it's like, oh no, it's because I'm just like making stuff up. Oh no, it's because we're aura, and like aura means like operating relatively at our best level or something like that, and it's like we have to make these sacrifices because we're operating on a level that other people couldn't understand. When you have that, like when you start to get that embedded in your head, and then you start to question things, your mind will take you back to what you've been told. And you've been told, oh no, this is this. And all of these people believe in X, Y, and Z. So that must be what it is, and it stops that thought. That's why it's a thought terminating cliche. It stops that idea of questioning. It stops that further analysis. It stops that further reflection on something that might seem a little bit odd to you. Number 7 in Lifton's criteria is doctrine over person. This talks about the idea of putting, the group or the doctrine over one person's needs. And so it doesn't matter if your needs aren't being met, it doesn't matter if you're not eating enough, it doesn't matter if you're not sleeping enough, it doesn't matter if you're overworked or whatever. The work or the spiritual work or what God requires or what the leader of the group requires is always going to be more important. The group's needs are always going to be more important than you. And also, that kind of gets into, there's a lot of sleep deprivation that happens and controlling of like people's eating habits. I talked a little bit about this in the fat phobia episode, but when you're not sleeping and when you're not eating enough, when you're tired and hungry, it's so easy to manipulate you. And you look at the patterns of all of these groups and it's like, they had a calorie limit. They only slept like this, or their sleep is always interrupted. And it's also like a form of torture, not getting enough sleep. That makes it just so much more easy to manipulate the mind because the mind doesn't have the fuel it needs to be operating at its highest capacity. And then 8th in the Lifton criteria is dispensing of existence. And this means that, if you go against the cult, or if someone goes against the cult or talks negatively about the cult, if someone is not feeding into the doctrine or feeding into the cult's needs, or you go against the cult or you're a part of the cult and you do something you're not supposed to, boom, you're gone. It's easy to make someone not important, to cut people off, to ostracize people, expel them from the group, or if they're already expelled, to make their existence mean nothing, or to say that they shouldn't exist, because they're not doing what the leader wants them to do. So I wanted to lay out all of these different definitions to kind of show how complex a cult is. It's not just one thing. It doesn't always look just one way. When you zoom in, you're always going to have those patterns, right? Those 8 things that I just listed. You're probably going to see a combination of all, if not most of them, in every cult-like group. And these are really also the processes of indoctrination, especially those 8 criteria, controlling all of these things. And I'm going to get into the BITE model by Stephen Hassan to get more about undue influence. But this is how they control people. When you look at these different definitions, all of it comes down to control and manipulation to serve, typically one person's end goals, if not maybe a couple people, a handful of people. But typically it's to serve one person's ego, to serve one person financially, to uphold one central figure. And I think when understanding all of this psychology, a big thing for me to wrap my head around was that people do this intentionally. I think it just was hard for me to understand because I understand how it's done. I just don't understand how someone would consciously go to these lengths to manipulate someone. That is just, I'm just not a manipulative person. I understand being like passively manipulative, right? Or unconsciously manipulative and doing things out of, a trauma response or patterns you learned or whatever, and not like truly realizing that you're being manipulative. I understand that. It took me a long time to understand and to really sit with the idea that most of these leaders are doing it actively and knowingly and hitting all of these things because they study each other. They study who came before. They study psychology to know that if I put these things in place, if I manipulate people in these ways, if I control these aspects of people's lives, it's going to ultimately serve the means that I want it to serve in the end. And it's important to understand that. It's important to understand how many people are actively manipulative and how much of society is and how much of like the systems within place were actively created in manipulative ways. And I think we understand that with like politics, and I talk a lot about the education system working as it's intended, or understanding, certain laws were put into place purposefully to still harm people, even when it was illegal to not harm groups of people, or how the prison industrial complex was created. So there's still a form of slavery today, even though slavery was outlawed, to still exert some control. I don't know why, maybe it's just me, it's easier to understand how all of that is purposeful because it's the system that we live within, than to understand maybe these smaller groups where it's just this one random person just deciding to like randomly be manipulative. But it's like obviously that all of these larger societal and systemic issues are created purposefully by people that have nefarious intentions. So obviously there's more of these people that are sociopaths and psychopaths and narcissists and manipulative by nature and are okay with that and lack empathy because it doesn't matter as long as it serves their end goal. Right? Not all of them are in the highest positions of power. Some of them are like these lower stake people, but are still wreaking havoc in every sect of our lives. Thinking about types of cults, there are religious cults. We've talked about self-help cults. I mentioned there are relational cults. Your family can be a cult. You and your partner could be in a cult-like situation together. That happens a lot with like narcissists and abusers, where you're manipulated into this certain way of thinking. And you can also think about the isolation of all of that and the control that goes into all of that. Romantic and platonic. Your friend group could be a cult. I'm just saying, I think a lot of people don't always want to see it that way. But, when we're talking about these high demand groups, these are groups that demand a lot of your time, attention, and money. And friendships and friendship groups can often demand a lot of time, energy, and money, just like families and just like romantic relationships. There are educational cults, MLMs, multi-level marketing. A lot of people in that industry want to try to differentiate them away from pyramid schemes, but it's all pyramid schemes. And if it's a pyramid scheme, that means that one person at the top is winning and everyone below them is in some facet losing and also being controlled by this person at the top ultimately. Hello, that's a cult. MLMs have their jargon that they all use, the scripts they all use, they all think the same way, they all want the same things. That's a really prime example of a cult like group that I don't think a lot of people always realize. Political cults, maybe to some of us obvious, but then also maybe to some of other people it's harder to recognize that as a cult. But again, once you understand what a cult is, you see it everywhere. Cults of personalities, that is kind of similar to like Keith Raniere, but his like the facade of NXIVM was self-help. But cults of personalities can be like celebrities or authors or actors or anything where it's like this one person has mass influence over a lot of people and you dedicate a lot of your time and money to those celebrities or those personalities. And then also psychotherapy and life coaches. The self-help industry as a whole is ripe with manipulative people and these manipulative groups because and as we'll get into, how do people join a cult? Most of the time, people are in a transitional phase. They're in a place where they could use community, they could use guidance, they could use help. Maybe they're looking for more spiritually, or they're looking for more out of their lives or to change their lives. And these cults or these groups offer that change and offer a way to elevate, your life and to change your circumstances. And so also in that time, you may be looking for a therapist, you may be looking for a life coach or a life group. Jody Hildebrandt and Ruby Franke, those Mormon people, they're a really good example of, a literal therapist using their degree to create this group of people that they have ultimate control over, and controlling their sex lives, controlling who they're married to, controlling their money, controlling their children. I mean, they went to jail for, the most severe child abuse charge that you can get before murdering a child. So I always say you have to be careful, especially with unlicensed practitioners like life coaches. And I'm not saying that everybody's bad. I know a really amazing life coach. I love her so much and she's helped me so much with my life. But there are so many people that can, because it's so easy to just call yourself a life coach, there's so many people that could, very easily take that and use it negatively and for nefarious means. We saw with Jody Hildebrandt, you even have to be careful of people that do have licenses. Okay, hi. We had to move into my room because my uncle came home and I need to stay in the zone so that I'm almost done with this. I told you guys I didn't have a lot of time. Well, there goes my hair. Okay, anywho, this is gonna be great clipped for TikTok. Great. I started to lose my voice. How long have I been recording? Jesus Christ. I know. I have to give myself 2 hours. I have to. Okay, so how do people join cults? According to Stephen Hassan, people don't join cults. Cults recruit people. And I want to talk again about risk factors, being in a transition phase, moving to a new area. You're in a point when you're questioning the world, you're questioning your religion, you're questioning your spirituality, you're questioning your place and your purpose, feeling stuck in life, which I think so many of us often go through these phases and do, or being in a new relationship. Again, we're very susceptible to missing red flags or being brought into a coercive relationship. And then going back to, people don't join cults, people are recruited. It goes back to the intentionality, right? So the group, the leader, it's very intentional and conscious of the manipulation that they're doing. And then, they don't really let their followers in on that exactly, but they teach their followers through jargon and through their doctrine how to be manipulative and to go out and recruit people. So if you think about someone that, is maybe in a church or in a group or, starting in a new workout class, and they're always telling you, you should come to a service with me. You should come to a class with me. It's so amazing. And you're like, oh, I'm okay. But then you're in one of these transition phases. You're in a hard place. And they're like, I really think you should come to a service with me. I really think this is time. This is really going to help you. And it's not the first time that they've asked. It's not the first time that they've brought up this group that they're in. And you're like, okay, I think I'll go. This is a trusted person in my life. They're telling me this thing has helped them or that this would be good for me. Let me go ahead and join it. And all of these groups are not parading around as sex cults or demon cults or we're going to kill you in the end. Jonestown was, supposed to be this communal living place outside of white supremacy and capitalism and the culture. And, you're thinking back to right around civil rights time, and he studied Martin Luther King and tried to use the same messaging as him. Even NXIVM, it's about self-help. Scientology is about making the world a better place, improving it, raising like the collective consciousness. So, or going, to a religious group, in a church. On the outside, it's not like, we hate homos and, you can't drink alcohol or all of these different things, or you have to abuse your children in order for them to listen to you. They're spreading the good word of God to elevate you and to bring happiness and wholeness into your life. That's how it's being sold to you. Nobody is selling to you, this nefarious, manipulative group. And oftentimes the people that are recruiting you think that they're recruiting you into an organization that is doing all of the positive things they're telling you that it's doing. And there's like this love bombing period, and and that goes back to like narcissistic and abusive romantic relationships or friendships. There's that love bombing, and we're so glad you joined, and the calling and checking up on you, and you're in this transitional phase, and all of a sudden these people that you took a chance on and that you were recruited into become your whole support system. And then all of a sudden, they're all you have. And then you're completely isolated. And then you're indoctrinated through manipulation, coercion, and undue influence or brainwashing. Sometimes there's blackmailing. And then all of a sudden, it's snowballed, into this huge avalanche that you had no idea what you were doing. It's bite-sized. It's slow. It's not all at once. You're in it before you even realize. So we've talked a lot about cult psychology, but I want to talk about the BITE model, which was created by Stephen Hassan. And that helps us to break down the psychological manipulation of a cult and mind control. How are they indoctrinating you? We kind of talked about that with the 8 points, but I feel like that's more of like what it looks like or how to define a cult if it has this criteria. But how do they really manipulate you? How do they control you? How do they recruit you and then keep you? So the model proposes, this is from Cults Defining Criteria. No, this is from the article linked below, Responding to Authoritarian Cults and Extreme Exploitations, a New Framework to Evaluate Undue Influence by Stephen Hassan, Thomas Guthale, and Menzies Shaw. And Stephen Hassan is defining his BITE model as a model that proposes that behavior, thought, emotional, and informational control constitute the 4 components of mind control. Human beings operate on the information they receive to function. Our brain relies on our senses to filter and evaluate data, so that we can decide how to act. The model proposes that behavior, thought, and emotional and informational control constitute the 4 components of mind control. Human beings operate on the information they receive to function. Our brain relies on our senses to filter and evaluate data, so that we can decide how to act. Sensory deprivation and information overload create conditions in which human beings cannot function optimally. Cults may suppress the real self and build a new identity over it that is controlled by the external authority of a cult leader. So the BITE model is really a framework that a cult or a cult leader uses in order to indoctrinate and then for further control. So the B part is behavior, which we've already kind of talked about with talking about, controlling people's sex, controlling people's sleeping patterns, controlling what people eat, controlling how people act, even controlling what people say, kind of gets into the language part. Controlling, what they do on a daily basis, controlling their schedule, controlling where they're spending their time. And Stephen Hassan says the ultimate goal of behavior control is to instill dependency on or obedience to the group, its ideology, and its leadership. All major life decisions must be approved or dictated by the group. A member who does not first get permission for major decisions faces punishment. Individualism is discouraged, and putting the group first is mandatory. We kind of talked about that before. Rigid rules and regulations are mandated and enforced. Thoughts, feelings, and activities of self and others must be reported to superiors. So that also gets into what happens a lot in these cults and in these religious groups is self-reporting, saying like, I had this bad thought. That happens a lot in Mormonism. People have talked about being ex-Mormons and they had, a sinful thought, like they had a sexual thought. And then they have to go and tell their bishop that they had these thoughts. Like, that's what you're taught to do. And then your bishop tells you what to do. So like self-reporting yourself or reporting other people. Cults thrive off of this creation of everyone always walking on eggshells, because you never know who, like, somebody sees you doing something bad, even if that's your friend, ultimately, right, their loyalty belongs to the group or the leader. And so even if they're your friend and they see you doing something that you're not supposed to do, in order for them to not get in trouble, but then also because they've been taught to owe absolute loyalty to the group or leader, they then go tell on you. So there's a lot of reporting on other people, watching other people's behaviors, and in a way, the leader, the guru, then doesn't have to do a lot of the work, because then all of his people are doing the work for him of keeping tabs on other people's behaviors. And that in itself is a form of behavior control. Clothing, hairstyle, sleep, we talked about all of those things. Also, when we're talking about this, I want you to really use the bite model and Lifton's 8 sins that he used to define a cult. Using all of this is how we can identify cults. So, when somebody is trying to tell you what to wear, how to think, when somebody's trying to tell you what to eat, when someone's trying to tell you how to talk. I also go back to like friendships, like we're in certain groups when major decisions have to go through the group, even when that's not always being demanded of you, but you feel like you have to. You're thinking about doing something or making a change in your life or moving or whatever, and you feel like you have to talk to your friend group or you have to talk to your youth group about it before you make the decision. And then what they say is what you'll do. When you are letting outside forces completely determine your life, that's always a red flag, no matter who it is, whether people have good intentions or not. And again, more people than not have bad intentions. More people are conscious of their manipulation, than we're able to understand when we are not consciously manipulative people. The I is information control. Stephen Hassan says analyzing information is vital to understanding undue influence. For example, an ethical group will inform newcomers about who the group is, what the group believes, and what is expected of them if they become members. An unethical group uses deception by lying outright, withholding vital information, and distorting information to make it appear more acceptable. Often all 3 types of lying are used, undermining the legal rights of citizens to have informed consent to make decisions in their best interest. So this also kind of goes back to what I was talking about at the beginning with Nixium and India Oxenberg, right? The sense that you cannot consent if it's not completely informed. And you also can't consent if you don't feel safe. And what a lot of these groups do is, like, and Scientology is a really good example. You think it's like this quasi-religious group that you go through these different classes and modules and do these different like therapies to become a better person, and you donate money and you go out and you work to help elevate the world. They want to elevate the world's consciousness. Not until you get to like very high up and go through years and years and years of indoctrination and going through these modules and whatever, not until you get to this very special level do you realize that Scientologists' true belief is basically that we're descended from aliens and we're doing all of this work, I think, so that the aliens can come back, or so that the aliens come back to get them. It's something like that. And it's basically like very science fiction. And then you realize that Ron L. Hubbard, who founded Scientology, was a science fiction writer, and it all makes sense. So, not only lying about the leader's criteria and bolstering the leader as, this special and this other and this better and this elevated person, but also the group. And not always knowingly, right? Like lower levels of Scientologists don't realize when they're recruiting people or they're spreading the good word about what Scientology is about. They don't realize that they're lying, but saying that something is something that it's not in order to get you in, right? And an ethical group will say, this is what we are about. This is what's expected of you. And this is what, you could expect of us. And for that to be true, an unethical group will purposefully lie and manipulate and twist the truth and try to cover up what's really going on. Again, and that's how it's so easy to recruit people, even like MLMs. MLMs, they recruit people and sell to people that you can be a girl boss, you can own your own business, but you're not owning your own business. Being an MLM salesperson is not owning your own business. You can own your own business, you can work whatever hours you want, you can make all this money. This like free lifestyle is like what they're selling. But then when you get in it, you realize it's not about the products. It's about recruiting people. And that's how you make your money, is by getting people to join under you so that then they pay and you get a percentage of what they're paying to join the group. And the more people you get, then the more money that you make. And you don't have all of this time freedom because it works solely on that, and there's only so many people in the world. You have to be working constantly. You don't actually own your own business. You are a 1099 contracted employee of this larger infrastructure, which is where your money is really going. Oh, and also like the products aren't actually as good as they are sold, to you and to the consumer. And actually, oftentimes, we're lying about what the product even is. And this is kind of language, too, controlling how people talk and how people, receive information and are given information in a kind of like unclear way and confusing way to keep people kind of clouded. Then also, controlling the information they receive by like, you can't watch the news, or you can only watch the news from this channel, or you can only get information from this pamphlet, or you can't go on the internet, or you can't don't look us up on the internet, like all that kind of stuff. If anyone ever said like, don't look me up on the internet, red flag number 1. Because why? Why are you trying to control the information that I can be absorbing and receiving? This is also, propaganda, specifically in like political cults, controlling the information that you receive for it to come from a specific narrative to get you to believe a certain thing. And Stephen Hassan also says, to be independent thinkers, people require information from a wide variety of reputable sources. Pause. I always say that. I always say, check your sources, check me, check my sources. You can't get all of your information from TikTok. You can't get all of your information from traditional news media. Like, we have to be getting it from multiple sources. Back to what Stephen Hassan said. Cults indoctrinate members to distrust critics, former members, and any media that is negative. Some groups tell members to avoid newspapers, books, articles, TV, radio, or any academic science-based information. And controllers keep believers so busy that they don't have time to think, to check things out, or to make outside relationships. Other groups control believers through their cell phones with GPS tracking, frequent texting, or calling. Some authoritarian groups have countless front groups to hide the parent organization. So that's also really interesting too, keeping you so busy. And that's where that high demand, group comes in, demanding a lot of your time. You go to a church and you're there every single night of the week, plus Saturday and Sunday, and then you're there Sunday for like 12 hours. So you have no time to anything else. When your friends constantly need you, demand you to be with them. When a workout group demands, that you're there 7 days a week at 6 a.m., like no excuses, or you can't be in the group, right? Like that is a high demand. They're keeping you so busy that you can't do anything else. You can't even think about what you're doing because you're so busy. And then the frequent texting and calling, that is another big indicator. Oftentimes in these cults, and even once again, NXIVM, they were constantly texting for what they thought was accountability, but it was really a form of control, constantly all day long blowing up your phone. Like, are you doing this? What are you doing now? Are you doing X? How are you feeling about this? Did you do this? Like, and you can see that in so many things. When anyone is forcing their way, and this goes to romantic partners and families again, when anything is requiring 100%, 70 to 100% of your time constantly, so much so that you have no time away from it. You have no time to think. You have no time to, talk to other people, to make more relationships, to expand your world. That is a red flag for a cult-like group. T and bite is thought control. Stephen Hassan says hypnotic and suggestive strategies that induce an altered state of consciousness are often used to reprogram people's thoughts and memories. That's when I go back to like intentional. Like a lot of these group leaders study hypnosis, they study psychological techniques, they study linguistics to understand what it takes to intentionally manipulate someone. He goes on to say other techniques to induce thought control range from hours of tedious, monotonous lectures several times a week, where members must memorize and regurgitate the correct answers, to audible prayers, chanting, speaking in tongues, and meditation, and ways that reduce critical thinking. Eyes closed visualizations and guided meditation techniques can allow a group to insert thoughts and beliefs into their members. So even using like psychedelics or meditations, like these are ways to insert your thoughts into other people's subconscious. They know that. There's also like really stark black and white thinking. It's good versus evil. It's us for them. It's black or it's white. It's this way or that way. And there is no room for in between. And if there is, you're out. Which kind of then that exile gets a bit into the emotional control, which is E and bite. And the emotional control is things like where it starts off as love bombing and flattering and making somebody feel special. But then slowly that love becomes dependent on how you're following the doctrine, if you're doing everything the leader tells you to do, if you're easily controlled and you're not questioning things and you're completely devoted to the group. And then if you're not, that love is removed and or used against you. Or often even sometimes these kinds of groups teach that emotions are bad, that there's no reason to ever feel sad. There's no reason to ever miss your loved ones that you're no longer able to be around. And again, like that isolation, you become then emotionally dependent on these groups because you're so isolated from the outside world. Then they also prey on your emotions with the thought of potentially being exiled or removed from the group or being disgraced by the group, because that's all you have. And so you're not going to be able to maybe even like physically, financially thrive if you're exiled from the group, but also you're not going to be able to be emotionally stable because this is where you're invested in. This is your sense of community. This is your sense of home. Again, with the emotional control, Stephen Hassan says, emotional coercion is especially forceful for individuals who are raised in the group and convinced to avoid the outside world as evil, and therefore do not know anyone who could help them exist. You could think of like the FLDS, polygamy groups, Amish, Mormons, like things like that. He says some groups will threaten physical or psychological violence, blackmail, or extortion if one leaves the authoritarian group. These threats can be directed not only to members but also to loved ones. Blackmail was a big thing. And NXIVM, coercing people to give up their secrets or to give up bad things about them, and then using that against them in order for their compliance. Scientology does famously very similar things, especially when it comes to threatening outsiders. So now we know what a cult looks like, what it could feel like, and what it might sound like. So how do we avoid them? The first thing is obviously awareness, which is what this whole episode is about. Understanding what it looks like, what it feels like, what it sounds like, in order to notice the red flags early on. And one of the things I said was once you see it, it's hard to unsee it. And so it does take some time, and it does make you almost fearful to create new relationships or join new groups. But it's also important to understand that just because something is cult-like or cult-ish doesn't always inherently make it a bad thing. Just because you and your friends spend a lot of time together doesn't mean it's a cult. Just because your company has company-specific jargon doesn't mean it's a cult. It's all of these things in combination, and ultimately when these things are used to control you for specific means. But being aware is the number one thing in order to avoid them. And then also to deconstruct the way that society in itself, the cult that is Western society, has indoctrinated you into believing all of these certain things. The only way that you can deconstruct that or certain religious beliefs is being aware, questioning. When you're coming into new groups or you're in a group already, questioning, is this something that really makes me feel good? What do we really believe here? Why are we really together? Are we really working towards the same things? Why do we think this way? Why do we want to do this thing? Why do I have to talk this way? Why do you want me to do something? Questioning always. Why are we doing things the way that we're doing them? And usually you're going to end up being like, okay, that's why we do it, or I don't get it, but okay. But when we stop questioning, when we go with the status quo and we shut that part of our brain down, we're so susceptible to being manipulated. And then boundaries, having boundaries with people. Not always going to everyone in your life before you make a big decision. We're not always going to every single thing, taking time for yourself. And, if not always texting back or saying, hey, from this time to this time is a time where, I'm probably not going to text you back because I'm doing XYZ, or I just need a break, or saying, we spend so much time together, or a group that, I'm here so much, I think I'm going to pull back a little bit so that I can invest my time in other things. And if it's not, a cult, if it's not a high control group, if there aren't nefarious intentions on the other side, even in friendships, that should be no problem to have a bit of space, to have a bit of boundaries. And then, even if they say it's no problem and they can repeatedly cross those boundaries, that's a red flag too. And then a big way that we can, avoid these kinds of situations is changing our habits and not getting stuck in a repetitive place. Various research shows that 60 to 90% of our daily activities are out of habit and are subconscious things. Most of the time, we are going on autopilot. One researcher, Professor Benjamin Gardner, says, our research shows that while people may consciously want to do something, the actual initiation and performance of that behavior is often done without thinking, driven by non-conscious habits. This suggests that good habits may be a powerful way to make our goals a reality. Think about how oftentimes you take your commute to work and how much of that you're actively thinking or on autopilot, or what you want to have for dinner, or when you call your mom, or what you want to do on a random Tuesday night, or what you do when you wake up, or what you say and what's funny to you, and what you watch. How you watch things. Oftentimes we don't realize, that they are not really always conscious decisions. They're coming from a subconscious part of ourself, the subconscious part of our brain that always wants us to be safe. And familiarity means and equals safety. And so our brain just operates within that route. So the better we can be at changing our habits, assessing our habits, maybe taking a different path to work, which will create a different path in your brain, can help strengthen that mental fortitude. So you're less likely to just habitually participate in things that aren't actually good for you. And that could be in a cult-like scenario of any that we've talked about today. So what do I want you to take away from this? I want you to take away an understanding of what cults are, what they look like, how you can identify them, what makes a cult, and what makes something maybe cult-like, understanding what a high demand group is and why it's demanding all of your time. And that it always doesn't look like Jonestown or Mother God, right? It doesn't always look super out of the ordinary. Sometimes it looks extremely mundane. And I want you to take away that there are cults all around us and constantly. There's almost potentially no way to operate in this world without coming into contact and being a part of some sort of cult, in a small scale to large scale. The largest being capitalism and the patriarchy and the democracy that we live in America, or political systems across the world. To live within society and to live by a certain rules or codes or ethics is to live within a sort of cult. But there is a spectrum of good and bad. There is a way to deconstruct. There is a way to begin questioning and to realize where this undue influence is controlling your life, where you're making decisions for other people, or because of the system that you live within has indoctrinated you to believe that these are the decisions that you're meant to make, where you're following things to distract yourself and escape because your gut is actually telling you the life you're living, the things you're doing don't actually feel good. You're in places, you're in relationships that aren't actually safe. When we can begin to recognize the signs it's not so much that we can always avoid, but we can position ourselves into a much more educated and prepared space to then operate within the world or to operate within these systems. And then we can also, for those that are in detrimental and harmful relationships or cults or groups or religions, we can empathize, but then also learn how to support people in those groups, because we understand that it's not just a choice. It's not just what they want to do. They've been coerced and indoctrinated and controlled through undue influence, through the bite model, through the 8 different criteria that Lifton mentioned, through everything we've talked about today in order to get there. And you can realize that anybody is susceptible. You can realize, again, how fallible the human mind is and how easily controlled it is. And the idea that you are uncontrollable is the lie that they have sold you in order to control you. You can reframe your relationships with celebrities so that you're not at every whim of theirs spending all of your money, going to all of those places, or feeling this emotional turmoil because of what maybe they're going through in their lives or what they're doing. You can exist outside of the political spectrum and look at every side at face value and see how they're using propaganda to control and sell a certain narrative. And then you can question and you can begin to come up with your own understanding of what is going on. You can begin to understand your own understanding of what's right and what's wrong. You can understand how the powers that be, these nefarious people, intentionally put these larger systems in place through colonization, through white supremacy, through the transatlantic slave trade, through all of these different things, have indoctrinated us into a belief of the way that life is supposed to be in order to uphold their position and their gain financially, sexually, and power. When you see this and you see the pattern, you see that what these gurus, what these leaders, what these politicians, what the 1%, what the puppeteers ultimately want is money, sex, and power. Every single one of them, at the end of the day, were manipulating for money, sex, and power. And you will realize that life is not just happening to you, but you are a puppet in a much larger play. And when you can deconstruct, when you can recognize, when you can be aware, when you can question, you can cut those strings, begin fighting against, and also live your life for yourself. And not be beholden to what society has conditioned you to believe is the life you're supposed to live. And you can free yourself. Free your mind. Free yourself. Free the fucking world. Cults are everywhere. And we don't need to be scared. We need to be armed with education and awareness. And we also need to not be scared to call it out when we see it. Okay, of course, there are tons of extra resources. This is just a drop in the bucket, a pin in a haystack of the rabbit holes and further learning and education that you can get. I hope this is such a beautiful starting point for you to discover more about cult mindset, undue influence. Stephen Hassan is great. Tons of resources below, some videos, some scholarly articles for you, some books. Please check it out. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Like, comment, subscribe. And babblers, I will see you in the next Babblings podcast. Bye.